So, the Crusades, very important topic in history, was first initiated by Pope Urban II when he claimed that their Holy Land, known as Jerusalem, that it was under Muslim control, should be taken back from them due to the tomb of Jesus lying there. So, they started in Europe and ended up going through the Byzantine Empire, and with the help of their emperor, gained the support to cause a 5-week siege to Jerusalem to fight against the Muslims for their Holy Land, causing conflicts such as the one seen here. And basically, these conflicts not only were affected people in that time, but led to this overarching conflict that lasted almost 200 years. So these crusades are very important as it started this conflict between these crusaders and Islamic people, but more than that, had a bigger impact on European culture and exchange, creating new ways of trade as these crusaders were going across Europe. They were talking to people, exchanging goods, and spreading, these goods, ideas, beliefs, cultures, everything, making more diverse societies. Also, it ended up weakening feudalism as powers started to become more centralized under religious rule and creating these new foundations for civilizations. And I feel like we didn't talk about it enough, especially within this first time period when we talked about global tapestry, and then even in Unit 2 when we mentioned these trade routes, and we didn't go into depth enough how significant the Crusades were towards impacting this exchange across the old world. So with this said growth of exchange with these ideologies, beliefs, goods through the Crusades, along with weakening of central or decentralized powers like feudalism, it changed Europe into a different direction and let it develop into the Europe that people know it as today, showing how significant these events were to world history.
You've probably heard all about the Pilgrims and the Mayflower, but Jamestown actually came first, and it was way messier. In 1607, over 100 English men and boys landed in what's now Virginia, hoping to find gold and get rich quick. Instead, they found mosquitoes, brackish water, and disease. Half of them were dead within months. They were sponsored by the Virginia Company. This wasn't about freedom, it was a business venture. Early leadership was rough, but then came John Smith, who basically told everyone, if you don't work, you don't eat. Survival improved. Kinda. Things turned around when John Rolfe figured out how to grow tobacco, and boo, the colony became profitable. Oh, and yes, that John Rolfe married Pocahontas in 1614, which helped ease tensions with the Powhatan, temporarily. So no, Jamestown wasn't a noble quest for liberty. It was a last-chance survival story that laid the groundwork for English colonization in North America. Why were there 13 colonies? Well, they weren't created all at once. And they definitely weren't all the same. Each one had different reasons behind its founding: money, religion, or politics. New England colonies, like Massachusetts, were built by Puritans, who wanted to create a religious utopia. Down south, it was all about agriculture, growing cash crops like tobacco and rice, and they depended heavily on enslaved labor to keep that system running. And in the middle, places like New York and New Jersey were all about trade, diversity, and opportunity. These regions had Dutch, German, Swedish, and English settlers all living relatively close together. So yeah, 13 colonies, but they were like 13 siblings.
Okay, so you might be thinking, why are we still learning about powdered wigs, tobacco farms, and some failed English colonies from 400 years ago? But here's the thing. Colonial history isn't just about the past. It's the foundation of everything that came after. The way the colonies were set up, that shaped our government, our economy, even the inequalities we're still dealing with today. Jamestown wasn't just a settlement. It was the start of American capitalism. The transatlantic slave trade, that began in the colonies. Religious freedom, that came out of the battles and compromises between very real, very messy people trying to figure out how to live together. Understanding this era isn't about memorizing dates. It's about seeing how a bunch of flawed decisions built the country we live in. And if we skip that part of the story, we miss why America is the way it is, comma. It's the perfect representation of what history classes do. Think historically. That's why it belongs in the curriculum. Not just because it's history, but because it's still shaping our present.
The American Revolution wasn't just about tea or taxes. It was the result of decades of growing tension between Britain and its colonies. After the French and Indian War ended in 1763, Britain was deep in debt. To recover, Parliament passed taxes like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act without colonial representation. Colonists saw this as tyranny, sparking protests, boycotts, and acts of defiance like the Boston Tea Party. But this wasn't just a local rebellion. When the fighting began in 1775, it triggered a global conflict. France, eager to weaken its old rival Britain, entered the war in 1778, bringing in Spain and the Dutch soon after. Suddenly, a colonial uprising became a worldwide war that stretched to Europe, the Caribbean, Africa, and even India. The ideas behind the revolution were just as global. The Declaration of Independence, with its message of natural rights and self-rule, echo Enlightenment philosophy. Those ideas would go on to inspire revolutions in France, Haiti, and across Latin America. So when we talk about the American Revolution, we're not just telling the story of a new nation, we're talking about a turning point in global history.
The Declaration of Independence, written in 1776, is often seen as America's founding document, but it was much more than a list of complaints. It was a radical political statement. At its core, it declared that governments exist to protect the rights of the people, and if they fail, the people have the right to alter or abolish them. That idea came straight from Enlightenment. Thinkers like John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, the main author, wrote that all men are created equal and have rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Powerful words, but also deeply ironic. At the time, slavery was legal. Women had no political rights, and indigenous peoples were being displaced. Even Jefferson enslaved over 600 people in his lifetime. Still, the Declaration became a symbol far beyond the colonies. It inspired revolutions and resistance movements around the world. Its promise wasn't fully delivered in 1776, but it planted an idea that generations would continue to fight for. That freedom and equality are rights, not privileges.
The American Revolution wasn't just a national event, it was part of a global shift. Teaching it in world history helps students connect it to the Enlightenment, global imperialism, and revolutions in France, Haiti, and Latin America. It shows how ideas like liberty and self-government spread across borders, influenced other revolutions, and changed global politics. Plus, the war involved Britain, France, Spain, and indigenous nations. It's not just America's story, it's the world's story too. And most importantly, it provides ways to think historically.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for.
The space race has been one of the most influential events of the last century, as it has influenced pop culture and the Cold War. But what was the space race? The space race was a competition between the Communist Soviet Union and the capitalist United States to prove which ideology was more technologically advanced. After World War II, the United States had claimed V-2 missiles from Germany. Scientists had come up with the idea to see if life could travel to space and come back to Earth alive. In 1947, United States scientists successfully sent fruit flies to space and were able to recover them. Then a year later, in 1948, they wanted to see if they could send rhesus monkeys to space, and they attempted to send a monkey named Albert I into space. Sadly, Albert I died of suffocation. Then they successfully sent Albert II to space in 1949, but on re-entry his parachute malfunctioned, and he died. In 1951, scientists were finally able to send Albert VI to space and successfully recover the space capsule upon re-entry. Although a couple hours later, Albert VI died of exhaustion and overheating. Then in 1957, the Soviets sent the first satellite named the Sputnik 1 into space. Although it was only 23 inches, it was a major victory for the Soviets. Later that year, the Soviets also sent a stray dog named Laika into space. On the Sputnik 2, although Laika was the first to orbit the Earth, they didn't plan to return her to Earth because they hadn't developed the technology for the re-entry of the spacecraft. The United States rushed into action to launch their own satellite named the Explorer 1. And in 1958, Dwight Eisenhower created NASA under the Space Act. Then in 1961, a Soviet man named Yuri Gagarin was the first human to be in orbit. Jealous of this, President Kennedy promised a man on the moon by the end of the decade. May that year, the Americans were able to send a man named Alan Shepard into orbit. The first American attempt to send a man on the moon was a disaster, as the Apollo 1 caught fire, killing 3 astronauts. Finally, in 1969, the United States ended the space race victoriously as they successfully sent 3 astronauts named Edwin Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins to the moon. Neil Armstrong was the first to step on the moon, delivering his iconic quote,
"It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
Overall, winning the space race was a huge factor for the United States to win the Cold War and prevent mutual assured destruction. Truly, this information would blow President Kennedy's mind if he were here today.